because while we were on this stream, I got I actually got this information last night from sources within Project Veritas, but I didn't have it confirmed until this morning because I wanted to get it confirmed from multiple sources before I shared it publicly. So for those of you who are following along with the Project Veritas drama, essentially this week Project Veritas fired the vast majority of their staff. They fired everyone. They didn't fire everyone. Like, there are still people at Project Veritas, and I have sources that are both still inside Project Veritas, and I have a lot of sources that have been fired from Project Veritas. And so basically Project Veritas cleaned out the majority of the staff. And that includes the undercover reporters, that includes the production team. So Project Veritas right now, although there are still some undercover reporters there, and I think they have one production team person there, as I understand it, Project Veritas right now is really not in a position to continue to produce news, to be honest. I also did hear speculation from multiple people last night that Project Veritas is essentially out of money. And one of the reasons that they're out of money is because Hannah Giles, who is the new CEO that they brought in to replace James O'Keefe, when the board hired her, she promised them and the entire staff up and down and left and right, I have contacts with all these donors. This isn't going to be a problem. I'm going to be able to bring in donors. Well, apparently those donors never actually materialized. So I don't know precisely why they never materialized, but it seems as though the donors that Hannah assured the board of Project Veritas that she was going to be able to bring in never actually came on board. And so what I heard last night, and this is speculation, is that Project Veritas is basically down to like $1 million in the bank. They couldn't make payroll, and there's really there doesn't seem to be much hope that that's going to change. So in response to that, Hannah fired the entire staff, and what she's planning on doing, and I got to tell you, if she does this, you guys are going to see me, like, people think they've seen me angry on this channel. You've never actually seen me angry. Just because you've seen me raise my voice, just because you've seen me shout, doesn't mean you've seen me angry. If Hannah does what I think she's going to do, you will see me unleash hellfire on her like you have never seen anything before in your life. Because what Hannah is planning on doing, after firing all the people who do the actual journalism at Project Veritas, she's skulking her way back over to James O'Keefe, and her big plan for how to move Project Veritas forward is to beg James O'Keefe to come back, to introduce her to donors, and to vouch for her with donors after she just fired all of the actual journalists, not all, but many of the actual journalists at Project Veritas. And this is her only plan to move Project Veritas forward, is to come kiss the ass of the egregious fucking narcissist that is James O'Keefe, to beg him to introduce her to donors. Now, the thing of it is what many of the Project Veritas now former employees that I've been talking to think is happening is Hannah is basically riding Project Veritas into the ground. She's going to grift on this for as long as possible and get as much money out of it as possible. And so this outreach to James O'Keefe is really just a way to continue to enrich Hannah, because the board made a really, really, really bad mistake in bringing her on as the new CEO. And it sucks. And I really feel for a lot of the people that I know from that don't work at Project Veritas anymore. And I'm, quite frankly, I feel for the people who I know who are still working there, because this is a situation that is really, really bad. And so I think if Hannah's, and by the way, this information does come from a very high level source that is still within Project Veritas. So that's how I know it. If Hannah's big plan is to basically beg James O'Keefe to vouch for her for donors, like, this is not going to work, because they just fired not all, they just fired the majority of their actual reporters. the people who actually do the journalism. And those people are really effing pissed off. They're really pissed off at James because James is the one that basically flamed and destroyed Project Veritas to begin with, and they're pissed off at Hannah for lying about her ability to bring new donors into the organization, because ultimately this was Hannah's responsibility when she took on the role of CEO. So that's what's going on right now. I also want to show you guys this from last night. I put it on my Twitter. So not that. That's a Nick Fuentes thing. Not that. This is a screenshot from James O'Keefe's Telegram group. Now, what you're going to see at the bottom there is James O'Keefe bragging about breaking Project Veritas. This message that you're seeing on this screenshot was only on James O'Keefe's public Telegram for like minutes, because James O'Keefe did not mean to post that publicly. James O'Keefe meant to post that in a private message, and he accidentally posted it publicly. And oh wait, one of my sources inside Project Veritas got a screenshot of it, and then he deleted it. So it's no longer in his Telegram now. James O'Keefe is literally bragging that he is the one that destroyed Project Veritas, because that was his goal from the very beginning. For those of you who haven't been keeping up with this story, James O'Keefe was not forced out of Project Veritas. That is not what happened. I've covered it extensively on this channel. You can go back and watch the other streams that I've done on the topic. What happened was James egregiously spent donor money on personal extravagances for himself, to the point where we're talking probably close to $1 million of donor money was wasted by James O'Keefe, to the point where Project Veritas was in jeopardy of losing their nonprofit status. The board hired an outside auditor and investigator to come in and figure out what had been spent and what the organization needed to recoup from James, because if they hadn't done something, they would have lost their nonprofit status. But they never pushed James out. That was not the intent. The intent was that they recouped their expenses from James O'Keefe's extravagant spending, and to be able to maintain their nonprofit status. Well, James didn't like being investigated because he's a narcissist. James didn't want anyone questioning him. James didn't want to be investigated. And so James O'Keefe broke his employment agreement by starting a new organization while he was still employed and still on the board of Project Veritas, while he was still collecting a salary from Project Veritas. The big 45-minute going away speech that we all saw, that James, what happened with that 45-minute going away speech was that James still had access to the Project Veritas offices. He picked a day to film that speech when the offices were closed, so he knew that people weren't going to be there. James then reached out to all his handpicked staff at Project Veritas that he was trying to poach from the company, invited them to come to the office to hear a speech from him. They didn't know why they were coming, but James's handpicked group of people that he wanted to poach from Project Veritas were invited to the office on a day that the office was closed, while James was still on the payroll of Project Veritas, to give this big going away speech to try to poach additional staff. And at the same time, it's my understanding that he took content that was already produced by Project Veritas so that he could take credit for it later. That's my understanding of what happened. He then told the staff that this video was just for them, that they were filming this speech just for them, but then immediately leaked it out to Tim Pool because he wanted to run a public smear campaign against Project Veritas. James O'Keefe then went all over conservative media smearing Project Veritas, which is a classic thing that a narcissist will do when they're taken out of control. They run smear campaigns to try to get their enemy, the person who took them out of control, back into control. James O'Keefe went on a conservative media smear campaign with the deliberate intention of destroying Project Veritas, because they audited his expenses and wanted him to reimburse the organization for donor money that he should not have spent on himself, on his boat, on his trips, on his luxury suite hotel rooms, on etc., etc., etc. This was never about black cars. James O'Keefe wants you to think it's about black cars. It was never about black cars. He was pissed off because the organization took away his unlimited credit card because he was jeopardizing their nonprofit status, and he set out explicitly to destroy them. And now he was bragging about it yesterday, accidentally in public on his Telegram. And so now we know that James actually maybe is successful because the fundraising dollars at Project Veritas, which, because Hannah promised that she had all this donor access, that was why she was brought on as CEO. Apparently, those donors never materialized. And now Hannah is ducking her tail between her legs and going back to James O'Keefe and begging him to introduce her and vouch for her with donors. To do what with the money? I have no idea, because they didn't fire all the reporters, but they fired a lot of them. They don't have anyone to produce journalism for them. They were working on all these stories that are just now dead. So I don't know what Hannah is going to be promising people in terms of what Project Veritas is actually able to produce, but I don't think they have the resources to produce journalism anymore in any significant quantity. And it all really sucks because a lot of good people lost their jobs this week. A lot of really good reporters lost their jobs this week. The reporters that broke pretty much, though not every, but pretty much every major story that you guys have seen Project Veritas report on, many of which James O'Keefe took credit for when he was not involved in the journalism at all. All those people lost their jobs. Not all, many of them lost their jobs. And we all suffer because of James O'Keefe's ego trip and his narcissism, and Hannah Giles' fucking incompetence in terms of actually bringing in donors, because I don't know why she took this job. I really don't, other than to suck Project Veritas dry of whatever resources she could. And now it seems she's just riding it into the ground. And my guess at this rate is that Project Veritas is going to die by the end of the year. And that makes me really sad. But since they've actually already fired the reporters and the staff members who were doing the work behind the scenes, I can't say like I'm really sad about it, because they kind of like made their bed, but it makes me really sad for the people who were actually doing the work and the journalism that just got completely thrown under the bus in all of this for James O'Keefe's ego trip. That's all it was. And I said it before, I'll say it again. Not only is James O'Keefe responsible for this, but every single conservative influencer that simped for James O'Keefe, that lied for James O'Keefe, to include Jack Posobiec, to include Steve Bannon, to include Charlie Kirk, to include Tim Pool, to include Viva Frey, to include Robert Barnes. Every single conservative influencer that was like, oh, James, you were just a poor abused victim of the system, and it must be all Pfizer, James. It's all Pfizer. It was never about Pfizer. Project Veritas was never paid off by Pfizer. That was made up. That was false. Every single conservative influencer that lied to spread James O'Keefe's smear campaign, this has been the biggest black pill I have ever swallowed in my life. Every single one of these people flat out lied to you. They lied. What every single influencer simping for James O'Keefe said had no basis in reality at all. And not a single one of them, to include the journalist himself, the journalist Tim Pool, not a single fucking one of them actually reached out to anyone at Project Veritas to find out what the real story was. I have talked to dozens of people inside Project Veritas. I have talked to people at all levels of the organization. I've talked to people at all different departments. I freaking know what the story is because I've heard the story from a couple dozen people. None of these influencers, whose only job it is to tell the truth, have actually gone and done any due diligence to find out what actually happened, and they all reported lies. So that's what's going on. And again, I'm really sad for all the people who lost their jobs. It sucks. And I know there are people working on helping them getting new jobs. And I'm sure they're going to be fine because there's a lot of really talented, really smart, really kind people. Um, but it just sucks. And we are all worse off for this. We are all going to have less real undercover journalism, and James O'Keefe is going to still do this charade that he's doing with this media group where, by the way, James O'Keefe's stories aren't even that good. He puts a beautiful bow on them, but do you guys see the kinds of people that he's getting? He's not even getting any high-level people anymore because James O'Keefe wasn't responsible for the journalism at Project Veritas. That's just fact. And we all suffer for it, and there will be less corruption exposed, and there will be less reports happening of things people need to know because conservative influencers lie to simp for James O'Keefe. And this is why the truth matters, and this is why who you listen to matters, and this is why I will never ever 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 support conservatives again, because they don't know the truth if it hits them right between the eyes.